All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started now. So, my name is Dr. Chad Papa. I am the director of the Forest Carbon and Climate Program in the Department of Forestry here at Michigan State University. And I would like to welcome you all to the fourth webinar of the 2025-2026 Forest and Climate Learning Exchange Series. I invite you to look at the screen right now and see some of the upcoming webinars that we have coming on and highlighting our January and February webinars that we'll be talking about kind of forest statistical models to inform management, as well as reforestation in February. Before we get started, I have some information I'd like to share. So, again, thank you to the hosts of the 2025-2026 Forest and Climate Learning Change Series, Society of American Foresters. The Society of American Foresters is a national scientific and educational organization representing forestry and related natural resources professionals across the United States. Founded in 1900, SAF promotes science-based sustainable management and stewardship of the nation's public and private forests. So again, a big thank you to our co-host of the Learning Exchange series. I would also like to highlight our upcoming January webinar given by Dr. Malcolm Itter at University of Massachusetts, who's a friend and colleague of mine who was once here at Michigan State. Malcolm will be giving a talk on forest growth and yield models to support adaptive management. This webinar will highlight challenges in predicting management outcomes under a rapidly changing world. And they will also discuss how we can apply cutting edge statistical models and forest dynamics to help make informed management decisions in the face of an uncertain, changing climate. So you can either click on the link in the chat to register for that webinar or use the QR code on the screen as well. Some just housekeeping as well. And so at the end of this webinar, we'll be having a Q&A session. So if you're interested in asking any kind of questions, I encourage you to use the Q&A function as a part of Zoom. That'll be in the bottom center of your screen. So click on that and you can either submit questions both anonymously or with your name, as well as you can use the chat function and send questions directly to the panelists. And we will do our best to address as many questions as we can at the conclusion of the presentation. I also encourage everybody to sign up for our mailing list at the Forest Carbon and Climate Program. You can do that by either scanning the QR code on the screen or by clicking the link in the chat. Lastly, I would also like to highlight that this webinar qualifies for continuing forestry education credits through the Society of American Foresters. If you registered for this webinar using the same email as your SAF account, your credits will automatically be applied to your account within about next month or so. But if you register for this webinar with a different email, please either contact SAF at cf@safnet.org to let them know that you attended this webinar or reach out to the Forest Carbon and Climate Program at forestc@msu.edu, and we'll do our best to kind of link you with SAF to make sure that you get those CFEs. And so, with that, I'm going to hand it off to our wonderful speakers from Youth for Nature. So, we're joined today by Aida Apamaku, Jennifer Hong, and Vinamra Mathur. And they'll be giving a talk called Empowering Youth Voices and the Power of Narrative. And so, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will be handing it off to our guest today.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Vinamra Mathur. I'm a global ambassador for Youth for Nature, and I'm joined by Jennifer Hong and Aita, who are both in global ambassador capacities, working and volunteering for Youth for Nature. So a little bit about Jen, you got this? Yeah. So today's agenda, we're going to give you a brief sort of outline as to what Youth for Nature is all about, diving into Storytelling 101, what makes compelling stories. We'll be sharing three different contexts in which storytelling can be useful, as well as some key messaging and resources for you all to check out once this webinar is over. So about Youth for Nature. We are a youth-led organization, and which empowers, educates, and mobilizes young people to lead and advocate for solutions on climate, as well as ecology, backed by science, community, and grounded in justice. We are for youth, by youth, and our vision is where a world and communities thrive within nature across generations. So, how did we get here and what have we been doing? Basically recently went through a revisioning process internally to sort of guide us to the new course. What we came out with was a threefold mission statement. One is to mobilize, so mobilize decision making, as well as take action towards nature and climate by 2030, to create co-benefits for social and human well-being, as well as elevate. So elevate the voices of youth by providing a platform to share their stories and have them be heard, as well as bridge. So bridge is bridging youth action between biodiversity and climate movements, and building capacity as stewards for nature and climate. Today, we will be taking a deep dive into the storytelling pillar of Youth for Nature. So, yep. And just a brief sort of outline about storytelling. Is our second pillar of work, and it is fairly self-explanatory. Throughout storytelling, we provide a platform for young youth from all around the corners of the world to tell their stories about nature and climate. We amplify these stories digitally together with storytellers in high-level decision making, creating space and showcasing ambitious and tangible work. You can scan that QR code and it will lead you to a story map for Youth for Nature. And you can see about over 100 storytellers all sharing their stories from all over the world.
Okay, thanks, V. So now we'll dive into the basics of storytelling. So storytelling 101. So first off, just in terms of what storytelling is, it's a social and cultural activity, and it links to sharing events, experiences, perspectives, and more. So lots of cultures have their own stories or narratives, and they can be shared for a number of different reasons. So, for example, entertainment, education, cultural reasons, or even discussing moral values. And they can also be told in many different formats. So we often think about oral and written formats, but there's lots of other ones, including visuals or gestures, even music and artifacts. And so, really, when it comes to storytelling, the possibilities are endless. It's basically just limited by our imaginations and our capacity for creativity. And this also explains why storytelling has been and can be seen in many different ways that also intersect and they also coexist. So, if we're thinking about the context of the webinar today, um, we can think about storytelling as a communications tool for change. And so at Youth for Nature, one of the key philosophies that we hold is that storytelling um, is a means to an end, but it's not the end itself. It's a skill and a tool that young people can employ to reflect on their experiences and their actions, to communicate their concerns and solutions, and also to showcase their work and their expertise. So we believe that stories can be powerful devices, and they also serve as examples of the understanding, change, and the mobilization that's needed to tackle the nature and climate crises. On top of that, well-communicated stories also open the door to different types of connections, resources, platforms, and audiences, and that can also help to further a lot of action that's needed on the ground. So, if you think about nature issues, often they're very large and complex. But by bringing a personal touch from storytelling, we can help people connect to the issue more deeply. And so for us, this is why sharing youth voices and youth-led action as widely as possible is important. So, in terms of crafting an impactful story, thinking about good stories, right? There's lots of different elements that come into play, but there are a few basic ones that we should keep in mind. So, one of the important concepts for drafting a good story is choosing your medium. The medium is the message. So, we can talk about videos, for example, spoken word, painting, photos, things like that. Those are different types of mediums that will help people relate in a different way. And then thinking about people, we have here on the slide on the bottom left ABCs. So remember ABCs, it's always about audience before content. So thinking about who you're trying to engage with when you're telling this story. So is it perhaps young people, or could it be appealing to decision makers, talking to other scientists? So really deciding on an audience, and who it's for, the story is for, is really important. And then we're going to start thinking about some other elements, including people, place, plot, and purpose. So people would refer to who's in your story, who's the story about, and why would the audience want to hear more about them. Place is about where the story is set. So thinking about engaging your audience by painting a really nice picture of what is happening in the scenario, right? What does the place look like? How does it feel? How does it smell? How does it taste? Right? And how does it feel for those people to be there? Plot is what would be driving your story. So, what issue is being undertaken? And for us in the climate space, we're also looking often at solutions-oriented stories. So, we'd encourage you to think about, taking your audience from this journey from problem to solution. And then lastly, we're looking at purpose, which is the why. So, why are you telling this story, and why should your audience care, and why is it important? And then when we're kind of wrapping up all the elements together, those basic pieces, we're also thinking about ways that the story can stand out. So often we find at Youth for Nature that the personal stories that really kind of tug at the heartstrings or kind of gather some type of emotion resonate a lot with people. And stories that are really clear and have a strong message are often a bit more memorable. So, I think that data, for example, is really important, but sometimes being able to tell that story and kind of use emotions is another really good way to kind of accentuate the data that we're trying to show. And then lastly, just being simple and focused. So again, keeping the plot simple and kind of reducing any distractions that might take us away from the plot is important. Okay. So with that in mind, there are a few common story structures that we see in the climate and nature space. So just from the left, there's autobiographical, which is looking kind of like at someone's life. It's a bit more of an individual view. You then have the hero's journey or awakening, which is, perhaps a character or a person that is on a journey between like a different type of work to environmental, for example. And then there's given occasion, which is a more one-off, event-specific or task-specific type of story. Um, and it could, for example, look like a blog that shares a bit more about what it's like to be at Climate COP. That would be an example of one. Okay. And then, so when we're thinking about the other elements of storytelling, something that's really important for us as well at Youth for Nature is how we can bring in diversity and uniqueness to our stories. And so diversity can come across in many different ways. These are just some examples on the screen. So for instance, when we think about ecosystems, right, we can talk about forests, we can talk about ocean ecosystems or a tundra. And then within those, we can probably continue to add more detail as well. When we're thinking about geographies, we often think about different countries and regions, but you can also think about urban settings, rural settings, or something in between the two. And then we can also think about the diversity of solutions and actions that we can incorporate into the stories. So, we can talk about conservation, for example, sustainable management, agroecology. We can also think about like political advocacy or access to decision-making spaces or, a scientific conference or things like that. So lots of different elements that we can kind of bring in to highlight the story and the messaging in the story. We also have like diversity of formats as well, which we've mentioned before. So thinking about, maybe not just oral or written storytelling, but maybe some poetry or spoken word, photography, or some combination of those different formats. So with that in mind, we're going to start thinking about storytelling in different contexts. I'll start off by highlighting a few like general contexts, and then after that, we'll go into some Youth for Nature specific ones. So in terms of uses of storytelling, there is the potential to use storytelling for politics and policy or policy making. So, for instance, sharing evidence in a digestible way for a policymaker and relating through like a personal story of someone in their constituency, for example. There's activism as well. So, using a narrative to shape movement building could be another example. We then have storytelling for research and scientific projects. So, for example, communicating and translating findings. This could be another way to relate to an audience. And then when we think about storytelling for education, we could think about ways to tell stories so that we can teach people about climate and biodiversity, for example. And then we've got storytelling for creative and cultural expression. So again, thinking about how we can use stories to further our cultural practices, maybe throwing in some art and knowledge formats in that way. And then lastly, for public awareness and participation. So similar to the other examples, here we're continuing to use storytelling to share information for citizens and also help them understand different policy agendas or ways that they can work together. So now moving into the different examples that Youth for Nature has used, we're going to start with storytelling for policy and awareness. And so one of the big campaigns that we work on at Youth for Nature is called the Faces of Forestry. It's a living library. So it's kind of what it sounds like. It's essentially showcasing the diversity of people and the types of work that are available in the forest sector and forest related sectors to kind of inspire a bit more of understanding and relationship building between folks who might not know as much about forestry or who are looking to get into forestry themselves. And it's about using this storytelling as a tool for impact. So you can see here, like we've got quite a few stories now. We've 7 series that we filmed globally. And it's one of the only campaigns where we kind of showcase young people in forests across the world. You can see more at the link there. And then these are some examples on the right-hand side of just other storytelling that we've done before. So through workshops as well as in like blog format. And so I've done a lot of talking. I thought we would turn it over to one of our faces of forestry to showcase a little bit more of what the storytelling looks like for us.
Hello, my name is Esteban Barriga. I am 25 years old and I am from Quito, Ecuador. For me, the forest in 3 words would be sustainability, wisdom, and harmony. I work in 6 communities around the Ecuadorian Choco Andino forest, one of the most biodiverse forests in the world. I developed these projects to boost the livelihoods of all the living beings in the territory as a resilient act against destructive activities that threaten our country. For me, the forest is a space of peace, surrounded by wisdom, by ineffable wisdom that just cannot be explained by words. There in the forest, I can somehow put in order all my thoughts and grow as a person. It helped me to learn a lot of things that I need. And I think I feel like a special connection when I am there and I am facing the question.
So there's a lot more of those stories, again, on our story map and also through the Faces of Forestry website, in case you're curious. Okay. And so just in terms of the policy piece a bit more, the past year, Youth for Nature was also involved in the American Forest Congress. And so one of the key outcomes of the Congress was for a principles and resolutions document. So just some written text where all of the participants were able to provide input to share what we'd want to work on moving forward from the Congress. And you can see here on the screen that we were able to highlight the community-centered storytelling that we work on quite a bit. And the Congress was also a great way for us to connect with other storytellers. So, for example, the folks from Forest Proud were there. There were some folks who were working on documentaries there. We had nature influencers, and the keynote speaker was a Nat Geo explorer. And then we also had brought a young explorer from Nat Geo to also help us with filming a new Faces of Forestry series as well. So it was a really great way for us to develop the series on the ground and continue that storytelling effort while also kind of capturing it in some written material that we can continue to draw upon after this. So with that, I'll pass it to Aita.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I will be taking it on from here, maybe for a few more slides. And just to introduce, I'm Aita Joshua Apamaku. I'm based in Uganda, Global Ambassador of Youth for Nature, and I'm also a Nat Geo young explorer. So I'll be taking you through a little bit of how it fits, storytelling could fit into the realms of conservation, based on some personal examples and case studies. But to begin with, it's important for us to understand that the idea of citizen science helps us to reveal aspects and layers of conservation knowledge. Usually what we determine or what we think is conservation knowledge is skewed. And the first step we always the first question we should always ask ourselves is, how do we truly understand the landscape? And what knowledge, for example, do we rely on when making key conservation decisions? So that's a very, very important first step. And it is very easy to say that for most of us who have a scientific background, our minds are wired to want to bring out the more technical aspects of what conservation information should be, which is now what we expect, which is through satellite imagery, technical reports, and mention them. And in this case, I will now try to present to you 3 different layers of conservation data. So in other words, let's think about citizen science as one of those 3 different layers, as you see in the presentation, that feeds into what counts as conservation knowledge. Technical data is very important because it gives us numbers, it gives us maps, it gives us models, which we can actually use to understand patterns and processes. And very importantly, of course, shows patterns, but there's a very critically important part it misses: the human experiences. And that is what citizen science tries to dig into to connect towards collecting information on traditional ecological knowledge systems, which are very important as well. But we understand that technical data is very important, but it's really not complete. And that's why we move to understand why citizen science, as you can see the three circles connected, shows that each of these is connected in a way. And citizen science in this case now shows that it captures different changes. What we see from maps, for example, are changes, but then it reveals further what the satellite imagery or what these technical data sets do not actually capture. So the stories that we get through citizen science approaches to now add some bit of texture, emotions, behavior, and micro patterns that are not captured in technical data sets. So that's what is usually happening, right? Exactly in real time. It's what you follow through, and then that's what makes you understand why people make certain decisions. And we have to connect this to the final layer, which is now local knowledge and lived realities. So when you understand the patterns and processes as to why people make certain decisions, then you'll be able to infer and know what counts to be for conservation. And a key example I'll particularly use here is a community mapping project and that I've been involved with, where this particular one here was involved in mapping the habitats of a particular bird species. And in this case, we had to use communities based on what they knew about access to areas where these birds used to be or were and are up to now, and getting their thoughts on what needs to be done to protect these, getting them directly involved in the mapping and recruiting citizen scientists who are now community members to now go on to do the mapping, to go on to do the sensitization, to collect different stories and ideas on what should work out best, as you can see from the illustration and image right here. And you realize such an approach is very important because it captures the emotion, but also makes people feel a sense of ownership. So citizen science just basically complements as that particular missing layer, which I think we're now getting to more realize now. Next slide. So the storytelling is a very interesting concept, and I'll now be reflecting a bit on my particular journey as a Nat Geo young explorer. I have been doing quite a lot of work with storytelling at Youth for Nature since the inception of the storytelling program, and it has been so much learning along the way. And then I got the opportunity as a Nat Geo Young Explorer back in 2023. And as you can see with the first illustration, what I was trying to show is that a landscape towards the left of that first picture, towards the left is a forest, and towards the right is an agricultural landscape. But what we see are two different ecosystems, but then there is an interaction that takes place on both sides. People derive their livelihoods on the right of the picture, where it's an agricultural land, they cultivate crops, but on the other side, it might represent human-wildlife conflict, it might represent resource access and use, and so on and so forth. But capturing each of these from people's experiences is very important because you get to hear from them and then try to design ways that work for everyone else. And as you can see with the first and second pictures tell a similar story. But then the pictures below are from a project I did that was more on capturing totemic values that are relevant for conservation. So for a number of people who have totems that might be plants or animals, mainly animals, we're now trying to capture each of those stories that spark the human-nature relationships. And that has been the bulk of my work, trying to get most of these relationships that look into the human and nature aspect. On the far left is a member of an indigenous group who was giving us the stories of stories of coexistence and correlation. And then the second picture, which you see right there, is an image of a red duiker, which is a totem for one of the local tribes around the particular forest community. And towards the right is also a woman who is from that particular forest, who is particularly from that community living close to the forest. So each of these images or this particular bit of work illustrates that there is a relationship people have always had with nature. And while we do the work we do, it's important for us to recognize that these relationships are there. They complement the data sets that we have. And what we want at the end result is getting local knowledge systems that work best for each and everyone. Next slide. Okay, and I think we'll take a sneak peek into storytelling for local action. So Youth for Nature has quite done lots of interesting work as well. A lot of the work at Youth for Nature has evolved from capacity building, knowledge sharing, and then storytelling was a very strong pillar at Youth for Nature. And the Inuka project is what came in to actually test that. For those who are familiar with Swahili, Inuka means rise up. And the idea here is that young youth around the world are leading the charge, are leading the change with nature-based solutions. In other words, the concept of nature-based solutions, as many of you may or may not already know, is one that has been there in existence, but by But through Inuka, it was more of creating awareness about this and showing with case studies that youth around the world were actually making the change. And in the Inuka project was primarily the Inuka project was conceived in Kenya, working with different youth groups. And the whole idea of this was also to create a storytelling campaign that amplifies and shows the power of working and supporting youth. As you can see with some of the three focal aspects of Inuka right here. Next slide. So the design of Inuka was such that it looked into different ecosystem types, as you can see. Towards the north is mainly a semi-arid landscape. Towards the image on the bottom right uh, is a coastal ecosystem, as you can see, mangroves. Towards the bottom left is a wetland ecosystem, Friends of Wandiri, it's a wetland ecosystem. And the whole point here was to show that youth are doing great work around in this case I would say Kenya, but youth around the world are doing lots of amazing work. And Inuka in this case was showcasing that NBS actually works as long as there's a level of inclusion where youth are involved, but also the rights of communities where these take place are actually also upheld. So many of these, the diversity of these ecosystems just comes in to show you that nature-based solutions in practice has to be context specific. It has to be based on local knowledge, but not imposed from elsewhere. Yeah, there's a lot more to learn about the Inuka project and a lot more to share about it, but I think I'll pause here for now. And in case any other questions or inquiries come through, I'll be happy to throw some more light if needed. And I think that will be it.
So yeah, so I think to wrap this up, I think some of the key takeaways that we have is, as Jen mentioned, storytelling is a means to an end. It's a multifaceted skill and a tool that we can use to connect people, knowledge system, climate, nature, and forest. Um, Storytelling is also about making an idea relatable. Remember to know ABC, so audience before content, and then remembering that media is the message. Um, Another thing I would like to emphasize is that youth definitely have stories to tell and to share their perspective, which can expand forest narratives beyond the traditional audience, which is one of the sort of key reasons the Face of Forestry campaign even originated and sort of is proving valuable for over 50 storytellers globally. And we're creating this ecosystem of these people communicating within themselves. And I know that this was shared in the chat earlier, but I would sort of highly encourage you to sort of absorb some of these examples of excellent storytelling out there. If not us, then who sort of focuses on films. There's definitely the Slingshot campaign by Nat Geo, as well as there are e-learning modules from UNDP. And I think we have mentioned a couple of podcasts as well as nature influencers for those who are still on the fence about how social media can be used for good impact. Please do check these folks out. As well as I think a personal favorite of mine would be sort of this talk that came out of the World Forest Congress in Durban, which is called Communicating with Purpose, a Tree Talk by Robert Grace. So if you do have a few minutes after this, because we plan to end earlier, I would highly, highly, highly recommend you guys watch this talk right after this webinar. And yeah, that will be all for us, and we can open it up for questions. And please do feel free to connect with us however you please.
Wow, thank you all. Thank you for such the great talk, and thank you for joining us. And so now, yeah, we can kind of pivot to our question and answer session. So folks that are attending, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A function or straight in directly into the chat to the panelists. So I'm going to throw out probably the first one that comes to mind for me, as well as some people have asked it, is how can you become more involved with Use for Nature?
Sure, I can take that one. And so again, we're a youth-led organization, and there is sort of some benchmarks that we have in place to kind of make sure that a community is sort of protected and as well represented. So you can reach out to us, and the only criteria that we currently have is that to be an ambassador, you have to be below the age of 35, as well as sort of contribute through either storytelling or submitting a blog, or if you want to join one of our pillars of work, then you can sort of express that. We do have about every quarter or 6 months sort of a global outreach for new global ambassadors, and I think last time we had 600 applicants and we could absorb five of those. So there is definitely not a sort of lag of talent, but yeah, it's also our capacity to meaningfully engage with these people moving forward. But yeah, check out our LinkedIn and our Instagram for calls, or just email us at hello@youthfornature.com and .org, sorry.
So kind of building off of that question, what are ways for other kind of citizen science organizations or networks to collaborate with Youth for Nature?
So I think overall we do sort of, yeah, always have very strong partners. I know that Gibbon is a strong partner to us, as well as Youngo, and we are coming out with the new NBS Youth Statement, sort of editing, sort of revising what came out in 2021. And we're always constantly looking for partnership as well, especially in the forest space, to both sort of drum up interest in highlighting some of these young voices, as well as finding partners in IFSA to co-lead sessions together and submit sessions for big global conferences. And that is one avenue where we have found the best to attract new storytellers into Youth for Nature. And maybe Jen, you can add to that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just in terms of Youth for Nature, we're always looking at kind of um, helping people feel like they can make action happen on the ground. So if that looks like collaborating with citizen science or other organizations, we're definitely very open to it. And I think the best way to kind of get that started is just through connecting with us, through social media or through email. And so that's a great start, and we can kind of go from there to see how we can collaborate.
All right. So we have had a few questions similar to this, but what is kind of some advice or a piece of advice you might give to somebody who feels hesitant or maybe not even creative enough to start storytelling? And just a little bit how can people feel maybe a bit more naturally confident when it comes to speaking?
Yeah, maybe I can start and answer those questions, and then I feel like everyone, like V and Ayata, can add on. Um, I think something that helps for me when I feel like maybe a creative block, or like I'm not sure how things will be received, is just like starting small. And again, starting simple, right? Like it doesn't need to be. I know that, for example, a lot of the Instagram reels or like TikToks like feel very elaborate and like funny or creative. And that's probably after many drafts and many versions of something. And so it might not be realistic to compare yourself or your creativity to that. And I think again, just thinking about the different types and formats of storytelling, there's lots of ways to tell a story, and it can be really small, little ways, just to get started. So I think just kind of making, in terms of trying to get started, finding ways to make it manageable for yourself, and thinking about what you might be interested in learning about, and kind of flipping the narrative a little bit might be a good way to also help. And then the other question about feeling confident speaking and small habits. Um, this one sounds a little silly, but like even speaking in a mirror, I find helps a lot. And just practicing a little bit every day helps a lot with that confidence.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like the bar is so high about content that is engaging currently. Like we have sort of always struggled with this of yes, you have recorded content, it's been put out, but like what change did it create, or like how did it move, or what opportunities that um, were being able to unlock were unlocked through a story. And I think in our storytelling pillar, we have pivoted to sort of focus and like capture that information now. And I think my solution to that was to be behind the camera to rather than be speaking in front of it. So it's just definitely finding your like skill and building confidence, and it's definitely part of it is like repetition. Like the more you do it, the easier it will get. I think yeah, one of these it's the same with writing or with speaking in a public setting. So yeah, those were my thoughts. I know there is a comment or a question about climate denialism and sort of the administration right now. And this is something that we also were kind of concentrating on right when the Ninth American Forestry Congress was like in its inception. And that's when the whole shift in administration happened. And what we realized was that there is definitely like there's a right group of people in the room who want to still make the right changes and want to like equip ourselves in that way. So it's definitely finding the right cohort of people around you, as well as I think every story that is put out there and whoever watches it, I hope that the needle is moved in some way to bring them on to the side of not being a climate denial. So that is the hope, at least for now.
I don't know, Aita, do you want to add on about the advice for storytelling, like how to get started and for speaking?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because I personally don't think I've actually got myself there yet. One of the what I avenues that I thought was quite helpful was getting involved with the Youth for Nature storytelling program, because at the start it was more evolving and trying to by engaging with the youth. At the start was running a number of storytelling workshops to basically find out what exactly worked and building on what exactly really wasn't working. But along the way, I also now tried to test into a number of storytelling media using writing. I also attempted using podcast, and I also did do that using film. But I think the best possible approach is just finding out what approach or medium works best, because I think it's always a work in progress in finding out how best to engage as a storyteller. But one of the things that I do hold more value onto is through storytelling workshops, where I'm actually engaging fellow young professionals like myself to think about causes or things that matter most to them, and then develop or go on to build from there.
So we have two questions that are both very similar. And so the questions are related to does Youth for Nature have any type of specific projects that help to bridge generational gaps or generational divides? And I think this is coming from, at least in the United States, the context is probably a lot of forest landowners are generally older. And we see a lot less younger folks in both kind of land stewardship as well as land ownership. So does Youth for Nature have any kind of programs or projects ongoing to connect with some of those generational gaps?
I was typing this answer, Jen. Maybe you can go.
Sure. I would say that in terms of connecting different across different generations, um, we've done it before through like events more so. So we'll have like intergenerational panels, for example, or we'll kind of share, we'll do like a career circle where we're talking about different points of folks' careers and what they realized along the way. Um, like all to say we really value that type of that knowledge that really only comes with time, right? And I think we actually did recognize as well, like especially with the private landowners, that came up at the American Forest Congress too, in terms of like how to connect more young people and increase the communication. So it's definitely on our radar, but I would say that we haven't come up with a specific project on it. But we are open to it. And I think that it's about finding a way to kind of take the learnings that folks have and translating it to a way that, maybe a younger audience might resonate with. So I see a lot, for example, a lot of videos of kind of older people using like younger people speak, and it's kind of funny. But I think there'd be an interesting way to kind of showcase that knowledge and transfer that knowledge a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we came close to sort of looking at it from a indigenous people's lens as well, to kind of how do you capture indigenous knowledge and make sure it gets transferred to a younger audience. And there was a series that was being debated and again thought for to kind of capture some of these nuggets of wisdom that might be lost otherwise. So, yeah, I think if folks are interested, we would be happy to explore that avenue as well, coming up in within international forestry spaces. And again, we are an international organization, so again, we are. Our storytellers are from across the board, everybody from Samoa to the US and North America.
Yeah, I can also. So, the work of Youth for Nature has largely been had from the stating the voices of youth, but one of the approaches we've been taking has been working through intergenerational spaces, and that has quite been helpful in a way because if you've been following so for example, the nature-based solutions, the work on nature-based solutions, which has been where the statement and all that work has been going on, it has been advocating for rights-based approaches that do not only focus on youth aspect, but are more intergenerational. And also another snippet from the Inuka project is that it was built on the basis that many of these solutions have actually been existing, and the collaboration in that case is between youth and local community members, which is a mix of all of women and so on. So I think Inuka is, to me, Inuka is one of the best possible cases where the intergenerational has been practiced on the ground. There are lots of learnings. So we learn from what happened on the ground with Inuka and see how this applies each and everywhere across the team and the work Youth for Nature does.
Vinamra, I see you're typing an answer to a question. Do you want
Yeah.
to maybe just talk about if there's any initiatives that are centered on the Global South specifically?
Yes, so I think the entire organization is focused on Global South. We are merely an NGO established in BC, Canada, but all of our projects sort of center around young people and advocacy, as well as capacity building for young people from the Global South. And what it looks like in some cases is inviting or taking people along to be part of international coalitions to the UN conventions, or for youth within these in sort of landscapes to come up with their own project that they feel they very strongly about, and we're able to support those. So I would highly recommend just looking through our blogs and the work that we've done before. Currently, we're working on a nature-based solution youth position statement, as well as Face of Forestry as our two active projects, which are focused on Global South.
I'll add a quick question to that as well. Something that I think about sitting here at a university in the US is, do you have any programs or initiatives that work to connect people living in urban spaces to nature and trying to bring stories to people that maybe don't have access to nature as easily?
Jen, do you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. Um, I think so. We have big range of stories on the story map. And I think that there might not be a specific campaign linked to kind of connecting urban folks with nature. But I think that a lot of the stories that are showcased do kind of have that nature element, right? Like they describe nature as a plot or kind of describe the environment that another young person might be in across the world, for example. I know like something that comes to mind is we have a series about climate migration, for example. So it just would give folks, I think, some more exposure to different nature related issues across the world. But I think, yeah, kind of having that discussion between like urban and rural settings or like something a bit closer to nature is something that we always want to highlight.
And I'll just throw out one last question, and that is there any like upcoming event that Youth for Nature is doing that you all would like to highlight before we wrap up this afternoon?
We just came back from COP, so I know and so I think now we're in strategizing for 2026 into 2027. But I believe that the youth position statement is still open for young people to kind of contribute to and how they understand NBS. So that we're basically coming up with a joint statement with Gibbon as well as Youngo to um, sort of give a overview of how youth are interpreting and understanding nature-based solutions. So if there are folks who want to contribute to that, please do, or please reach out to us. And then honestly, if you have cool ideas, we would happily sort of hear from you and have you be part of the team. I know the Face of Forestry campaign is also going through a theory of change sort of revision to look out for the next big Forestry Congress, which is the World Forestry Congress in Peru in 2027. So that's where we're looking out towards.
Great. Thank you so much. And I would just like to thank all of our speakers one last time, as well as invite any remaining participants just to look ahead to our upcoming webinars. Again, reminder, Dr. Malcolm Itter will be presenting in January on forest growth and yield models. Matt Creasy and Hannah Haas from the Great Plains Institute will be presenting on some of the reforestation work they've been doing and challenges to nursery and seedlings. And as well, we have our listserv that you can scan the QR code on your screen for, as well as the next webinar if you want to register for that as well. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us again, and I hope to see you in the new year.
Thank you, everyone.